Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Gittin daf kaf tet. We're going to have a lot of what we call mirror sugyas today, where we're going to read it in one way, and then we're going to read it in another way, or flip what we saw, and then everything in the sugya is going to be flipped. So what happened yesterday is we started with the Mishna of Rabbi Elazar ben Parta, and he talked about particularly what we're focusing on is that someone who was convicted to be killed, we are not sure really if they're actually going to be killed. So we assume kind of the worst of both sides, which means we assume they might be dead. We also assume they might still be alive. So it all depends on what we're talking about. But, for example, the wife can't get remarried. The truma goes by, right? The woman can't eat truma either which way, whether she's a bat kohen, she can't go back to her father's house. And if she's married to a kohen, she can't eat truma because she's married to him because maybe he's dead. So then we saw Rav Yosef. And Rav Yosef said, the fact that we're not sure if they actually kill him is only in a Jewish court, of course, because Jewish court will always reopen the case, whereas a Gentile court, once they rule, and that's a done deal. And therefore, when you're about to be executed, there's no way that they didn't execute you. But now, and then we brought three questions on this. Number one, don't they take bribes? We said, oh no, they only take bribes before they decide definitively. Then we said, we had two Talmudic sources, which we'll review again today, which both also seem to indicate the opposite of what Rav Yosef said, and we resolved them. So now we're going to do the exact same thing in the reverse. We're going to say that actually he says the opposite, and we're going to explain the logic. Then we're going to have a logical question against that, which is going to be based on the logic we said yesterday, but flipped. And then we're going to bring the same two sources that seem to contradict the previous. I'm sorry, I should say it again. We're going to say, there is a logical question. Then we're going to bring the same two sources that we thought raised a difficulty on what Rav Yosef said to actually say, oh, these two sources should support Rav Yosef. And then we're going to reject and say, no, you don't have to read the sources in that way. So the exact same thing, but the opposite, right? If this is the opposite of that, then if that was a difficulty, now it will be a support. Ikeda Amre, starting from the very bottom of Kaf Chet Amud Bet, Amar Rav Yosef, Lo shanu ela bebeitin shel avdei kochavim. This is only true in a Gentile court. Aval bebeitin shel Yisrael kevan denafik ledina lekatla katlele. Wait a minute, they're saying the exact opposite. In a Gentile court, they'll always change their minds. But, and why is that? So Rashi adds in, because they'll always take bribes. You can always bribe your way out. They're always happy to take money. Jewish courts, of course, never take bribes. I'll put that as an aside. But the assumption is Jewish courts don't take bribes. And therefore, once they rule, and they're not going to change their mind about it. Here comes the logical argument. But wait, didn't we say yesterday that they'll always open it up again in case somebody comes forward and says, wait, I have something to say for this person. They didn't really do it. Same type of answer as yesterday, which is yesterday we said, don't take bribes. Oh no, they only take bribes before it's decided. Same thing in a Jewish court. They'll only reopen the case if it hasn't been finished. Once they decide definitively the person's guilty, they're guilty and they go forward. They don't change their minds. Why don't we provide this as a support? Now, this source I realized that when I was preparing for today that I didn't explain it clearly enough. So today I'm going to kind of fix the way I said it yesterday, and I'm going to be more clear about this. So now this source says, okay, let's assume the first judgment happened in New York, and now we're in California, and this guy ran off to California, and he's in California, and someone brings him to court and says, hey, I saw this guy convicted in the court in New York, and these were his witnesses, and two people come and say this, because otherwise it's not enough. If just one person, two people come and say it, they're going to kill him based on this. Now, what's the issue? I missed this yesterday. This is an important point. The point is, it might be very nice. Let's say I'm part of the witnesses who say, listen, I know this guy was convicted in New York. Well, if I say that, we're going to assume it's true because me and another witness came forward and said it, but it doesn't mean that they didn't reopen the case in New York. They could have reopened it and found some reason to exempt him. So therefore, how do we know, this is the part I missed yesterday, how do we know that the case wasn't open again? So this seems to show Jews don't reopen cases because it's enough to say he was convicted and that's a done deal. We can kill based on this and not be worried, well, maybe they reopened the case and I just don't know about it because I left New York before that happened. So now the answer makes a lot more sense. Dilma Boreach Shani. He ran away from, and this is a guy who clearly ran away. And therefore, because we see him now in California kind of hiding out, it's clear he ran away. If they had reopened his case and then he was not guilty anymore, then obviously he wouldn't have a need to run away. So it's clear that they didn't clear his name. Okay. And that's why this doesn't provide support, basically. Okay. This doesn't provide any support for the fact that Jews don't reopen cases, because it could be cases are reopened. Just in this case, it's clear it wasn't reopened, but it doesn't mean other cases they won't reopen. Hashma, third a reaction to this answer of Rav Yosef, this explanation. Shamami Beitin is that same long one where we have to kind of do some gymnastics to figure out what exactly are these words talking about. So Shamami Beitin Shel Yisrael Shayom B'rim Ish Ploni Meit Ish Ploni Neherag. They heard in the Jewish court that they announced this person died, this person was killed. Yasi with Ishto. We can say his wife gets married based on this. But if the executioners, who are Gentile executioners, announced this person died, al yasi with Ishto. We can't assume that it's true and that the person's dead, and therefore his wife can't get remarried. My mate to my neherag. What do we mean that they announced dead, killed? If it really means that they said literally what it says in this Braita, which is he died, he was killed. Why on earth can't she get married? Don't we learn? Anyone who's just talking in the context of conversation or the context of something else, but not a testimony in a Jewish court or something like that, then we can assume they're telling the truth. And therefore, his wife should be able to get remarried. And therefore, right, why can't we marry off the wife based on what these executioners announced? They seem to have no ulterior motive for lying. They're just kind of making a public announcement about who was killed in their court. That should be enough evidence. And therefore, they assume, at least at first, in order to say, here's support for what we were saying, Elalah mate, but mate must be Yotze Lamut. He was going to be executed. That's what they announced. V'neherag Yotze Lehare. Okay, both of them meant this person is about to be killed. What do you see here? As soon as they announce someone is about to be killed, is going to be executed in a Jewish court, you can marry the wife based on it. Why can you marry the wife based on it? Because you can assume that he's dead. And why can't you marry if it's the Gentile court? Because you never know. Maybe somebody paid, maybe they paid his way out and they took a bribe. So that seems to support what we're saying. Lo olam, but then they say, no. Really, we can understand it. Mate mamash. V'neherag mamash. It really is. They announced, this guy's dead. This guy was killed. It has nothing to do with someone who's about to be killed, and therefore it's totally irrelevant. But now we just have to still understand. Why don't we believe these guys who announced? And we saw this already yesterday. Don't we know you're always believed if you just say something, even if you're a Gentile? That's only if they have no ulterior motives. Here, this is related to them. They are what we call nogeh b'davar. They have a vested interest. What's the vested interest? The vested interest is that they want to show that we're a tough court and we kill people for all sorts of reasons so that people are scared of them and people keep the law in the country. And therefore, it's in their best interest to just say, oh, yeah, we executed this one, even if they didn't necessarily. And that's why we don't believe them. And again, you have to remember that this is talking about a specific Gentile environment that was going on then, where there were suspicions of these kind of things going on, where, you can try to imagine around the world places where this might still go on today, but most Gentile courts actually keep to rules and wouldn't ever say something like this if it weren't true. But they're discussing the Gentile courts in their time that did do these kind of things. New Mishna. Hamevi get be'eretz Yisrael v'chala. Now we're going to have a whole issue of a shaliach appointing another shaliach. So we know that there's a concept of shlucho shel adam k'moto, which means a shaliach is just like the person themselves. So they kind of take the place of the person. So does that mean that they could then appoint a new messenger? Let's say they just decide, I don't want to do this. Can I switch with somebody else? So there's all sorts of rules about this. In fact, in Kiddushin, it says you can make another shaliach. The question is going to be, can you do it here? And what are the issues that come up? And what are the circumstances under which this is permitted? Hamevi get be'eretz Israel. So the first Mishnah is going to talk about in Israel, and then we're going to get to outside of Israel. Obviously, the difference is going to be that outside of Israel, you have to say b'fanei neftam, b'fanei neftam. If you make another shaliach, right, you're the one who saw it being written. You appoint someone else, they can't say that anymore, so it's going to have to be a little bit different. Doesn't mean it can't be done, but it has to be done in a bit of a different manner. So that will be the next Mishnah that we'll see on Amud Bet. Hamevi get be'eretz Israel v'chala. So you bring a get from Israel, and meaning, right, you don't have to say b'fanei neftam, b'fanei neftam, and you get sick. Okay? So you can send someone else to bring the get. You're too sick, you can't get out of bed. Okay, ask someone else to do it. But if he says, I want, okay, she has my silver Kiddush cup, make sure to get it back from her. Okay, that's like a nice way of saying it, right? She has something of mine, bring it back. Okay, as opposed to maybe saying, like, trying to extort her for money, but we'll get back to that later. But if he says, I want you to bring back my silver Kiddush cup with it when you give the get, he can't appoint another shaliach to do that. Why is that? And this is something that comes up in Baba Metzia and in other places. People don't want everybody handling their stuff. They trust you. They trust you to bring their Kiddush cup. They don't trust someone else to bring your Kiddush cup back. So for that element, it sounds like here there's a distinction. To bring the get, you can have anyone. It's not like he cares about the get itself, that something happened to it. He trusts you enough to bring the get, and you can ask anyone else to do it. And that doesn't matter to him, because in the end, he's not the one getting the get. But when you're returning something of his, or something he wants to get, that already he may only trust you. And therefore, you can't pass that on to somebody else. This is, again, all trying to think about what goes on in the head of somebody. What are they thinking? When they appoint you to be a messenger, it depends what they're appointing you to be a messenger to. Do they really care that just you do it? Or are they fine if somebody else does? Now, it's a little bit tricky here because it seemed to indicate, and certainly the Sugin Kiddushin that says a shaliach can make another shaliach, it sounds like you don't necessarily have to be sick to do it. But the Gemara here says, Amar Rav Kahana, chalatnan. It says sick, and it means only if you're sick. To which the Gemara says, pshita, isn't it obvious? Chalakatani, what are you adding, Rav Kahana? It says sick in the Mishnah. Obviously, so this is what we call ones, right? What we mean is something happened beyond your control, circumstances beyond your control, like getting sick, and you didn't anticipate that was going to happen. So you can appoint another shaliach. But according to Rav Kahana, it's only if you're anus. It doesn't work otherwise. So we're going to have to figure this out. So first, the Gemara says, isn't it obvious? That's what it says in the Mishnah. That's obviously what it is. To which he responds, or the Gemara responds for him, Mahu ditema, you might have thought, Hu adin afagav delo chala, that maybe you can appoint a shaliach even if you're not sick, or anus as we would call it. V'hai dekata, right? Anus means circumstances beyond your control. V'hai dekatani chala orcha demilta katani. Maybe it was just saying, what's a typical example? The Mishnah loves to give examples. What's a typical example of when you might appoint someone else? When you're sick. But theoretically, maybe you could do it even if you just, for whatever reason, were lazy, didn't want to do it. So Kamash Malan, that's why Rav Kahana had to tell us it's not just there by accident. It's intentional. It's intentional that the Mishnah said chala. It's only if you're sick can you do this. So now the Gemara wants to know, hey Chidami, what are the circumstances by which you can only appoint another messenger if you're sick? And now we're going to raise a question on this. Ida Amar le holech, if he says, go deliver the get, and he wasn't very specific about anything, all the husband really cares that the get delivered. Why should it matter if you do it or someone else does it? And therefore, afagav delo chalanami. Even if you're not sick, it seems like it should be totally fine. We're going to see this all in a braita in a minute. Ve'ida amarle at holech. If the husband says to you, you go, where it's clear he wants you to go and nobody else, well then, afilu chala nami lo. Even if you're sick, it shouldn't work because he said specifically he wants you to do it, which means you can't ask somebody else. V'i rashbag. Now, if it's going to be rashbag, we didn't see rashbag yet, but we're going to see in a minute. There's a machloket tanakama and rashbag in the Mishnah, in a braita. Sorry, I rashbag afilu chala nami lo. Rashbag, no matter what, doesn't let you. Whether you say holech or whether you say holech at, he holds you can't appoint another shaliach in either case, and it shouldn't matter sick or not sick. So now we're going to see the braita, okay? Which it'll be more clear once you see this braita, and then you'll go back and understand all those three options. According to the Braita, Tanakam is going to distinguish between Holech and At Holech, and Rabban Shimon and Gamliel is not, but let's see right now. Holech gets el ishti, harei ze meshachol b'yad achil. The Tanakama says, and this is what we just said, if you say Holech gets el ishti, anyone can switch, right? Bring it in you can send someone else instead of you. Again, doesn't say only if you're sick, seems no matter what. If you should be, right, the husband said, you go deliver this get. And again, it doesn't say anything about being sick, so we assume even if you're not sick. Rashbag says no matter what, whether you say holech, atolech, you can't make another shaliach. So here we have it. It's very clear there's a machloket between the languages, but within each of the three options, because we have Tanakama who gives two options, and Rabbi Shbag who has only one option, nobody distinguished sick or not sick, and therefore our Mishnah seems to match none of them. To which the Gemara is now going to give three possibilities. They're going to go back to the three options and explain each one of them. Okay, and these are all just three possible explanations of how Rav Kahana understands this bright. You could say that when Tanakama said holech, if you say just bring the get, you can make another shaliach. It didn't say so in the Braita, but maybe it means only if circumstances are beyond your control and you get sick. Alternatively, maybe the case is you go, specifically you, and Tanakama said you can't appoint a shaliach, but what would you say? Halal shane. But the Mishnah is talking about a regular case. The Braita. The Braita is talking about a regular case. But if you're sick, then even Tanakama will make an exception in that case. So a man said, you go deliver my get. And then even though Tanakama says you have to deliver the get, not if you're sick or the circumstances are beyond your control. And then that would fit perfectly with our Mishnah. Third option, you could probably guess this already. Rashbag who says, whether he said olech, whether he said atolech, it doesn't matter what language. You have to be the one to do it. You can't appoint another shaliach. The husband clearly wanted only you. But if the circumstances are beyond your control, obviously you can appoint another shaliach. So again, the Braita wasn't relating to a case where you were sick. In the first option, it was specifically talking about when you were sick. That was the first option. But the other options are, it wasn't talking about when you were sick, and sick is an exception to those rules. So basically, we started with Rav Kahana said only when you're sick. We said, how does that work with this other Braita? And then we saw three possibilities of how that Braita can work in with our Mishnah. So now we're going to bring a contradiction between this Mishnah and the Mishnah on Daf Samach Vav. So that's our Mishnah. Seems very clear. You get sick, you can switch, no problem. That contradicts the following Braita. Now, the following Mishnah. Before we get to the next Mishnah, let's just be clear about the details of this case, because that's going to play an important role here in the resolution. You have a get in hand, and you say to the messenger, deliver this get to my wife. In this case, Amar l'shnayim tnu get l'ishti. In this case, there was no get yet. And he says to two people, give a get to my wife. The way this is going to be understood as meaning is, since he doesn't have a get in hand, and he says, give a get to my wife, what he means is write a get and give the get. And we're going to see in a minute that only they can write the get and give the get. They can't pass it on to anybody else. Olish losha, or he said to three people, hitvu get utnu l'ishti. Now, normally, if you say to three people, just give a get to my wife, since three people is a court, what you really mean is I'm appointing you to be in charge of this, and you can go find two other people to do this. You don't have to do it yourselves. But if you use the language to the court and say, write and give the get, it seems clear that you specifically want these three people to write it and give it. And therefore, in both those cases, either the two or the three, and the language that you use, again, we'll get into all this when we get to Daf Samach Vav, but the assumption is you wanted specifically them to do it, and they have to do it. And that seems different than here, where you can appoint someone else instead of you. So why in that Mishnah can't you appoint someone else instead of you? To which they answer, right? Aval shaliach lo. There it seems to say only those people and nobody else. So Amar Abaye, and we'll discuss this also when we get to Samach Vav, there's two potential reasons. Actually, only one of them is mentioned in the Gemara there. Here it mentions two potential reasons why this is, and we're basically going to show that those reasons don't apply here. First option, hatam tamamai mishum bizayon debal. It seems to be there. Why did the husband say, you write the get? He was embarrassed. Embarrassed by what? Either he was embarrassed that he doesn't know how to write and he needs to ask someone else to write things for him. That's one possibility. And therefore, he doesn't want anyone else to know about it. So he wants specifically you to do it so that it stays in closed quarters here. Or he doesn't want people to know that he's planning on divorcing his wife until it's a done deal. So he wants them to write it so it stays quiet. If they start telling other people, we all know what happens. As soon as one person talks to somebody else, everybody hears, and he doesn't want word to get around. So for whatever reason, again, we don't exactly know what the bizayon of the Baal is, but he specifically wants them to do it because it's embarrassing. But Baal lo kapit, here the Baal doesn't care because he's already giving the get. The get is written, right? First of all, if you say it's the writing of the get, well, he already wrote the get. So it's not like he's embarrassed, I don't know how to write a get. If you say it's about divorce, I guess he's ready to give the get, so then he's not worried. Rava Amal, Mishum de Mile lo mimsarin l'shaliach. This is a subject of debate. Whether, this is a very interesting debate, and you have to think about what the reason is. I can give you one possible answer. Sure, there's lots more written about it. But when a shaliach gives an item, like the get, okay, the husband gave the get to the messenger can take that get and give it to someone else and say, you go bring this. But if it's words only, which is the Mishna in Samach Vav, is take this get, write a get and give it to my wife. There's nothing tangible yet. When there's nothing tangible, because there's nothing tangible, it's harder to pass that on. Okay, either it's a weaker type of, okay, then now you have to get into it. This whole daf in general is about how shlichut works. Shlichut is a fascinating topic. You could spend at least a year learning the sugyot in depth of shlichuyot. And we're going to get to more of them both here in Kiddushin. These are all very central sugyot. In fact, Gefet today is going to be on shlichut after death, which comes from later on in our daf. It's already up on the site. Also, a very interesting thesis of the Tzot about how to understand shlichut, and therefore can there be shlichut after death. But that's a very interesting topic in and of itself. So all these topics are fascinating. And again, we're doing Daf Yomi, so we're just doing, just the surface of these topics. But here's this difference, which again requires further in-depth understanding. I could pass on an item for someone else to bring to someone else, but I cannot pass on words. Words is just a command. That I have to do myself. So when it's kitbu b'tnu, write and give the get, you can't pass that on to somebody else. But in this case, it's not mile, it's actually an object. Go bring the get to my wife. And it's not obviously a case of, I don't want my pikadon to be in someone else's hands. It's a separate problem. But in this case, it's just get it there. It's much easier for you to just pass that on to somebody else. Again, big question, why there's a difference. It requires some more thinking. My benai, what's the difference whether you say bizayon de Baal, if we just stick with that sugya and samach vav for a minute and zoom in, say what's the difference if you say it's bizayon of the husband or it's because it's just words and words can't be passed on to another messenger. If someone says go write a text to give this gift to somebody else, then there would be a difference. And Rabban Shimon actually disagree on this issue, and you can match that up with these two opinions of bizayon of the husband and milil mitzur l'shaliach. Rav Amar matana ena kaget. Matana is different. Why? Because there's no embarrassment to the husband. First of all, if you say it's the embarrassment of the get, there certainly doesn't exist in a get. And if you say it's the issue of writing, really the shtar matana does not have to be written for you to give the get. So it's not a critical element, whereas in get, it's not a get without it being written. Shmuel says matana harehi kaget because it's mile, it's just words. Go give this gift to someone. So that's words, and words can't be passed on to anybody else. And then matana would be the same. It would obviously have to be right again, where you said write this shtar matana and give it to somebody else. So again, it's just words. The im amarlo. Now we're back to the Mishna. Im amarlo toli hemena chefetz ploni. If he says, get back my Kiddush cup that she has in her house, then that can't be given to anybody else. So Amar Rish Lakish, Han Shana Rebbe, from here Rebbe derived, Ena Shoel Rashai Lahashil, Ena Sochel Rashai Laskil. Since it says he can't pass that on to anybody else, likewise, if you borrow an item, you can't loan it to somebody else. And if you rent an item, you can't rent it out to anybody else. It's a bit of a strange thing to say we learn from here, right? Wouldn't you think that's just obvious? And that's in fact what Rabbi Yochanan is going to say. Amar lo Rabbi Yochanan, any little kid knows that. You borrow something, you don't lend it to somebody else. You rent something, you can't rent it out to somebody else, right? Everybody knows that. That's basic. Why are you saying that we learn it specifically from this Mishna about a very unique circumstance? So Rabbi Yochanan says, so the Gemara explains what he's really saying is Zimna de Gita nami lo habe. He's saying something else entirely, or that sometimes this isn't even a get. Dinasa, Kimisha Amar lo al tigrasha ele bebeitin, ela bebayit, vigarsha ba'aliyah. Al tigar shala b'yamin, tigar Shabbos. If somebody says, deliver the get and get this item from me when you deliver the get, sometimes we understood the Mishnah as you can appoint someone else to bring your get, but you can't appoint someone else to accept the item back. So now they're saying that sometimes this doesn't even work at all, meaning you won't even have a get if you appoint a shaliach. Okay, meaning if you appoint a shaliach to, let's say, accept the item, that actually cancels your get as well. Okay, you can't have someone do both. And we're going to explain exactly what this means, but it's like saying, and here again, this is all about shlichut, the shaliach is like the person themselves. So they have to do what the person said. If you veer from what they said, then it's no good. So it's like if the person said to you, divorce her in the house, and instead of the main floor, you went and you did it on the top floor. Now, you might say, who cares? Or you say, divorce her, give it to her with your right hand, and you gave it to her with your left hand. That would actually be a canceled get because the shaliach didn't do what he was sent to do. So now the Gemara is going to explain better what this means. And the first line is a little bit tricky, and there's different tricky meaning. Commentaries don't really know. There's all different explanations of what this means because it's hard to understand the simple reading. Everybody agrees. We're now going to say basically there's a machloket Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish. In what cases, how would this work? But sometimes this doesn't really work. And there's a debate about this particular case that we're going to see. If she goes out to greet the messenger, and she gives him, let's say, okay, I'm just using this Kiddush cup as an example, but she hands him the Kiddush cup of the husband. And then she takes the get. Everybody agrees that this is a good get. Okay, first of all, it's not clear what shaliach we're talking about. It's not clear what's going on here. So some people explain, and this I think made the most sense to me, so I'm going to go with this explanation, that she went out, the shaliach couldn't bring the get, he was sick. So she goes out to find him, she gives him the object, and then she gets the get from the second messenger. So that's fine because there's a total differentiation, and she already gave the item back before she got her get. But so that everyone says the get is fine. The machloket is when he says to her, turning now to Amud Bet, Shkol mina chefetz v'hadar havlagita, where the husband was very specific. It sounds a little bit like extortion possibly, and says, take the item first. I'm thinking of like one of those, you have to pay the money and there's like a ransom and you say, first give the money and then I'll give you the, whoever I kidnap back or something like that. So first get the item from her, then give her the get. And what did he do? Azal ihu. Now, again, it's not clear first messenger, second messenger, but in a second, we'll see what they say about this. It really doesn't matter. First messenger or second messenger. Azal ihu v'yav lagita b'hadar shakamina chayfetz. And he first took the item first he gave her the get before he got the item. In other words, he switched the order when the husband was very specific about the order. And then he got the item from her. So it's kind of like, does the end, right? If in the end you get what you want, does it really matter how you did it? So Rabbi Yochanan posel bo v'koshakem b'shlucho. Here comes the machloket Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, right? Rabbi Yochanan says, not only is it a problem if you, who are the messenger who was sent to do this and you mess it up, right? And all the more so if you sent someone else to do this and they messed it up, right? The concern is also that if the husband's very specific, chances are that when you pass it over, this is what we call, right, the game of telephone or broken telephone, right? Really telephone. The telephone becomes broken. If the husband was very specific about the instructions, when you pass it on to somebody else, there's a concern that they're going to mess it up. So in this case where he said, make sure to get the item first, and the shaliach didn't, he ended up with the item anyway, whether he does it himself, whether he appointed a shaliach to do it instead of him, either which way, it's no good. And Rish Lakish, machshir b'shlucho b'chol shechein bo. Rish Lakish has no problem, not with the shaliach and not with him. Rish Lakish doesn't, in the end, if he gets back his item, it doesn't really matter. The get is a good get. Okay, maybe he shouldn't have done it and done it in the wrong order, but in the end, it's fine. And that's really this argument between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. Okay, maybe now would be a good time to just go back and summarize this part of the daf, okay? Because we've done a lot of different things and getting kind of lost in the flow. So before we start the next Mishnah, we'll do our review of the first half of the daf. So we started with Rav Yosef, the second version of Rav Yosef, and we had one question and then two potential supports, which were the two questions we had on the previous version, and resolved them, and basically not resolved, rejected them as supports. Okay, so again, there was this two options of Rav Yosef, whether when it says we have to treat this person as perhaps alive, perhaps dead, even though he's already about to be executed, there's a debate whether this is specifically in a Gentile court or in a Jewish court. Today we tried to prove it was a Gentile court in a Jewish court where we're not sure if they're really going to kill him or in a Gentile court, because there we're not sure whether they're going to kill him or not, because maybe they'll take bribes. Yesterday we said it was specifically in a Jewish court because they might always try to find some schut. They might always reopen the case. Today we said the exact opposite of yesterday. Then we had this Mevi Get Eretz Israel, and then he gets sick. Rav Kana said only if he gets sick can he appoint another shaliach, and then we had to reconcile that with this Braita of Rashbag and Tanakama, and we had to give a bunch of possible interpretations. Then we brought this contradiction between the Mishna and Daf Samach Vav, where it seems clear that if the shaliach is told to do something, the shaliach has to do it. And then here it seems the shaliach doesn't have to. He can pass it on to someone else if he's sick. And then we talked about possible, the reasons why there it doesn't work aren't really relevant here because they're different cases. And then we got into this idea of you have to bring the item yourself. You can't make a shaliach to do it. And then we saw this machloket in the end, finally figured out what exactly Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish are arguing about, whether you switch the order of the way the husband wanted it to be done. He specifically wanted you to get the item before you gave the get, and you switched it. Does that invalidate the whole giving of the get or not? And can you pass that on to a shaliach or not? So both those issues Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish deliberated. Now we have a new Mishnah, which is the same idea as the previous Mishnah. It's just now you're abroad and you want to bring the get to Israel, and you need to say b'fanei nechtam, but now you can't bring the get. So maybe get me medina hayam v'chala, and you get sick and you can't do it and you can't travel. So what do? Oseh shaliach bebeitin. You appoint another shaliach in the court. Umishalcho, and you send the get. The omer lifnehem. Now, why do you have to do this in court? Because you need to make this declaration. So instead of making the declaration when you bring the get into Israel, since you're not bringing the get to Israel, you do it in the court. Then the court appoints a shaliach. And then ein shaliach acharon, the last shaliach, which is a little strange. It should have just said the second shaliach. So we'll see what the Gemara is going to infer from this. The last shaliach doesn't ein sarich sheyomar b'fanei nechtam b'fanei nechtam. When he gets to Israel, he doesn't have to say it was written in front of me, it was signed in front of me. First of all, he can't. It wasn't. So he doesn't say anything about it. But what does he say? Omer shaliach beitin. He says, I'm a messenger of the court. Then the rabbis in Israel assume, well, if you're a messenger of the court, it must be that the court validated all this and that everything is fine and it's good to go. It must be that somebody said b'fanei nechtam b'fanei nechtam. Okay, so now it seems that I see you're asking about who appoints in the court or the husband is actually going to be a big question here. It's going to come up, that whole issue. It's not exactly clear. Sounds like he makes his own, and that but it could be the court appoints. It's a good question. Amrule Rabbanan la'avimi b'rei Rabbi Yavahu. So now we're going to have, again, another sugya with two versions of it. So first we're going to say, the rabbi said to Avimi, the son of Rabbi Yavahu, and they said to him, Ba'al minei Rabbi Yavahu. Rabbi Yavahu was asked the following question, Shaliach de shaliach, mishabe shaliach olo. Now we're getting even more complicated. Forget about a shaliach appointing another shaliach. What if you were a messenger, appointed by a messenger? Can you appoint a third messenger? Amar lehu, and he said to them, Haloti. So Rabbi Avimi says to them, Haloti ba'ilifu. That's totally not a question. Why are you even asking that question? Said, Midikatani ein hashaliach ha'acharon michlal de mishabe shaliach. Notice the language of the Mishnah. I told you this before. It says the last messenger. The last messenger seems to apply that there could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 messengers. And the last one, when you finally get the last one, who gets to the court, right? Then, he doesn't need to say anything, right? He just says, I'm a messenger of the Beit Din. So what do you see here? Clearly, that's not even a question. Ella, but if you have a question, this is the question you should ask. Ki mishabe shaliach bebeit din afilu shelo bebeit din. When you appoint a shaliach, does it have to be done in the court, or can it even be done outside the court? Hamruleh, so then they said back to him, and he said, that's not a good question. This is a much better question. To which they said to him, that's also not a good question. You can learn that straight from the Mishnah. Hamruleh, halo mebayalan, that also you don't need to ask. Mitikatane ela omer shaliach beit din ani, it seems very clear that it has to be done in a court. Okay, it has to be appointed in a court. It doesn't say, by the way, who does the appointing, as you asked it, but it does say it has to take place in the court. Presumably, I would assume that the shaliach has to do it because he's the one, and we're going to get to some cases later where that's exactly the issue. But here, I think the simple understanding is the shaliach appoints another shaliach in front of the court. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak matnei hafti. He had a different version of this whole conversation that went on between the rabbis and Avimi. Amrule Rabbanan Avimi bereid Rabbi Avau. And again, it's going to be like the reverse sugya. Ban minei Rabbi Avau. The rabbi said, we asked Rabbi Avau, shaliach d'shaliach ki meshaveh shaliach bebeitin or shelo bebeitin. The question the rabbis asked was, does it have to be done in court or not in court? Here it seems pretty clear, by the way, that shaliach of a shaliach, right? When one shaliach appoints the other, is it done in front of a court or not in front of a court? Amar lehu, v'tibai lehu. You should better ask, im meshaveh shaliach ba'alma. Can this even be done? In other words, why are you asking? Can it be done in court? Does it have to be done in court or not? Why do you ask? So the previous question, which is, how do you know it can even be done? Maybe it can't be done. To which they answer him, no, that we didn't ask because that was obvious. Right. In the first case, he was the one who said it was obvious. In this version, they said it's obvious. Amrule, halo kamebayalan, ditnan, ena shaliach ha'acharon, michal, b'shaliach meshaveh shaliach. Because of the language of the Mishnah, the last messenger, it seems clear there could be many. Ela ki kamebayalan, but our question was, bebeitin or shelo bebeitin. To which he answers them, as opposed to they answered this in the first one, hanami lo tibayilahu, dekatane, ela omer shaliach beitin. Again, he says that's not a question because it says shaliach beitin, which means it clearly had to be done in front of a court. So we basically have the same sugya, just flipped who asked what question and in what order were the questions asked. But basically, it's clear from our Mishnah what we want to infer. The main thing to just review until this point is we had this case of bringing a get from outside of Israel due to two different sentences in the Mishnah. One saying the last messenger, and well, really it's the same sentence. It's just different parts of that same sentence. And he says, I'm a shaliach beitin. From there, we see last means there could be a whole bunch. Shaliach makes a shaliach makes a shaliach makes a shaliach. And the second is that it has to be done in court, specifically when it's coming from outside of Israel, so that they know that b'fanai neftam was taken care of by the first messenger. I'm a rabbi. Now we're going to distinguish between this and shaliach be'eretz Yisrael. He says, osek kama shluchim. You can make many messengers without having to go to court at all. Rav Ashi, imet rishon batlu kulam. Rav Ashi says something very strange. If the first one dies, the first messenger, then all the other messengers are canceled. Why? Well, there's something very logical about this, but in a second, we're going to knock this out entirely. And his son is going to say, what a ridiculous thing my father said, but he's going to say it a little nicer than that. So what he's saying is, all the strength, and again, this gets into what is shlichut, the strength of the subsequent shlichuyot, right? So the strength of the shaliach is in the husband. But the strength of the subsequent shlichim all comes from the first messenger. So if the first messenger dies, and this is where Gefet's going to go off into the Rabbanit El Shimoni and Gefet this week on our site is all about bringing a get after someone's death. If the messenger dies, all the koch is in the messenger at this point. So if the messenger dies, the first one, if he appointed a second or a third or a fourth, right, and then they appointed a third or fourth or fifth, the first one dies, all the power of the messenger, the shlichut, is in this messenger. And therefore, as soon as he dies, everything else is canceled and you can't go give the get, even if the husband's still alive. And that's what basically the child of Rav Ashi is going to say. Amar Marbar Rav Ashi, Hada Abba Kadnuti. My father must have said this when he was very young and obviously must have changed his mind because this is ridiculous. He doesn't say that, but it's clear he's saying ridiculous. And now listen to his words. If the husband were to die, would they be able to deliver the get? No. So that clearly proves all these messengers come from what strength, what force, from what force is it coming? It's clearly off from the husband, not from the first messenger. It's the husband that's the important one, not the messenger. So if the first messenger dies, it doesn't matter. If the husband's still alive, they give the get. Okay, and he disagrees with what Rav Ashi said. Now we're going to have two stories. And we're going to see what happens in these stories. And again, it's going to be an issue of the messenger appointing. And here it's going to be the issue of he's going to appoint the court, and the court is going to appoint a messenger. And is that okay or not? And we'll talk about that. A man sends a get to his wife. Amar shaliach layadanala. He says, listen, it's very nice you're sending me to give this get to your wife, but I don't know who your wife is. So how am I supposed to get it to her? Amar le zil yahabe la'aba bar minyumi de'ihu yadala. Okay, so you don't know where she is. Go bring it to Abba bar minyumi and give it to him, and he'll deliver the get. He'll bring it to the wife. So he goes, and he can't find Abba bar minyumi. These are three Rabbanim in Israel. This is going on in Israel. The Yativ Rav Safra Gabadi. Now, Rav Safra, who's from Babylonia, is with them. He doesn't have smicha. That's why he's called Rav. They all have smicha. This is going to become important in a quote later in the story. That's why I'm just setting it up. He was with them. But Amrule, so these three rabbis, not Rav Safra, says, Misor milech kamididan. Give us your responsibility. When he shows up in town, we'll give it to him and he'll give it to her. So basically, pass on the jurisdiction to us and we'll take responsibility for it. Marlu Rav Safra says to them, what are you, crazy? This shaliach was not a shaliach for bringing the get. He was a shaliach just to bring the get to Rabban Yumi. He wasn't a shaliach to deliver the get to the wife because the husband said, give it to Rabban Yumi. So you can't then take this from him and go appoint, as you as the middlemen, go appoint Rabban Yumi, because he can't pass on the authority for you to appoint a shaliach laholacha. All he's supposed to do is give it to Rabban Yumi, and Rabban Yumi is supposed to bring the get to the woman. But he can't put you in the middle to do this because he's not a shaliach gerushin. He's just a shaliach to carry this get to Rabban Yumi, and he didn't do that himself. Ichsafu. They all get embarrassed and say, "Oh wow, you're right. I can't believe we ruled this way. You're right." I'm a Rava. So Rava's reaction to the story is Kapchinu Rav Safra Litata Rabbanai Smuchim. Rav Safra, who didn't even have smicha because he was from Babylonia, they didn't give smicha in Babylonia, just wiped out, kind of knocked down these three rabbis with smicha. I'm Rav Ashi. Rashi's reaction is no. What are you talking about? What happened in the story? He told him, go bring the get to my wife. The guy said, I don't know your wife. He said, fine, so give it to Rabban Yumi. But he didn't say, I only want you giving it to Rabban Yumi. I don't want you to deliver the get. If the guy somehow figured out who the wife was, he'd be able to deliver the get. The husband, it's true, he changed his tone, but he only changed it because the person said, I don't know. It's not like he didn't want him to be a shaliach b'gerushin. So he is a shaliach b'gerushin. In fact, Rav Safra was wrong. So now, Ika da Amre, as I said today, it's just all about different versions of the story. Some people say that Amar Rava, Kapchinu Rav Safra, Litzlata Rabbanan Smuche B'ta'uta. The Rava was the one who said he knocked down those three rabbis with smicha by accident. He was totally wrong. And then Amar Rav Ashi's reaction was, my ta'uta, what was the mistake? My ka'amarle, Rabban Yumi, below at. The husband in the end said, bring it to Rabban Yumi, he'll deliver the get and not you. So it's all a matter of what words we focus on of the husband, right? And who said what in the story? Was it Rav Ashi who agreed? I'm sorry, was it Rav Ashi or Rava who agreed with what Rav Safra did or not? Which one went against him? Which one was with him? And what do we focus on? What the husband originally said or what he said in the end? What he said in the end, is that an undoing of the first, or is it just saying, well, he has a second alternative? Next story. Someone sends a get to his wife. Don't give it to her, though, till the end of the month. Okay, in 30 days, give her the get. Itnis b'go taltin yom, and within 30 days, something happened to this shaliach, and he can no longer bring the get. Ata l'kamei de Rabba, so he goes before Rabba. Amar Rabba, halata mamai mishum da'anus, hainami anusu. Look, you were sick, right? I'm sorry. The Mishna says if you're sick, you can appoint someone else. You have circumstances beyond your control. It's basically like being sick. So yeah, you can appoint someone else. So Amar le. Misor milach kamedigan. So he says, tell me what you're supposed to do. Pass on your responsibility to me. Till the batar taltin yomin, and when the 30 days are over, mishaven shaliach b'yave le'niele. We'll appoint a shaliach, and that shaliach will give the get to the wife. Amar le Rabbanan le Rabbah. So now the rabbis, again, just like the previous story, they come to Rabbah and they say, what did you do? Same thing as last time. Now here, why is he a shaliach who's not supposed to bring the get? Because today, in the middle of the month, the get is not valid to be given. So right now, he's actually not a valid shaliach to bring the get. If he was a valid shaliach to bring the get, he could appoint the court, who could then appoint a shaliach. But since today it's not valid to bring the get, he can't actually appoint the court to do something that's only going to be in another, 15 or whatever, however many days. But then, Amar Lehu, he said to them, what are you talking about? This isn't like the previous case where the husband in the end said, don't bring the get, give it to Rabban Yumi, and therefore he wasn't a shliach l'halacha, at least according to some readings. In this case, since he could bring the get after 30 days and was appointed to that, even though today he can't bring it, he's in the realm of being able to bring the get. To which they ask another question, and with this kind of question and short answer on it, we'll end our daf. V'licho shema pies. But if the get, how can we appoint someone else now to bring the get? Maybe in the meantime, the husband changed his mind. Milo Tnan, do we not have this Mishnah where on it we're going to say, aren't we worried about Shema P.A.s? The husband says, here's your get now. It will be your get from now under the condition that I don't return in the next 12 months. And he dies within the 12 months and therefore doesn't return. Hare said get. This is a get from before, even though there isn't get after death. But this get was given me'achshav, retroactively, it applies from before. And they asked a question, but maybe the husband decided in the end not to divorce her. Now he's dead. We can't ask him, and maybe it's really not a good divorce. My father said in the name of Rav. The only way this case works is if the husband at the beginning said, and you are trusted to be the one to say that I didn't show up. Meaning he's giving all the responsibility to her, and he's basically saying, this get will be valid unless I actually show up, and the scene will trust you to be the one to decide that, like, to say what happened, which basically means that he's not planning to, undo the get, because if he does undo the get, that will mess her up, and she's the one who's now believed. He basically gave her all the rights to be believed. In which case, Rava got really embarrassed, because really, maybe you do have to worry. And it's in this case, you didn't have to worry in the case Me'achshav, because specifically said Nyamenet. In our case, he never said that she'll be believed. If I don't give the get in 30 days, in which case, or there was no case like that. It wasn't like if I don't show up. So Rava was embarrassed. But Gamliel to Da'alusa. But then he found out that she was actually betrothed and not married. What's the difference between Arusa and Nesua? If they were married, it's more likely that he might change his mind. And then you'd have to be worried, because they've already been married. But if she was just betrothed to him and he changed his mind about marrying her, there's unlikely, right? And the idea is that since you've lived together, you have such a strong love that you might change your mind. But if you haven't lived together, you don't really have that strong bond, and therefore it's unlikely that he would change his mind about it. And that's why we're not worried Shema P.S. And therefore Rava realized that his Psak in the end was okay. So we have all sorts of things about Piskei Halacha here that they started questioning and raised all sorts of issues about, and kind of saying, oh, maybe we should overturn it. At first they thought yes, and then they realized, oh, maybe not. Maybe it's not so clear cut that it's an issue. Okay, so what we had in the last section was both, again, the Mishnah of bringing it from abroad, has to be done in the court, has to be done, you can appoint many shlichim if you want. And then we had these stories about, but maybe there's a problem when it's a get shalom nitan l'gerushin. And what is that? And are these cases that or not was really the deliberation. With that, we'll finish today's stop. Have a great day, everyone.